It was the briefest of moments, a flicker of recognition that passed between them in a sea of 1,000 faces, unnoticed by the crowd, yet heavy with the weight of a shared, unspoken journey. On a day meant for grand ceremonies and public celebration, a single, powerful glance between a future king and his wife, followed by a monarch's deep, silent bow of respect, would whisper a story no official biography could ever tell, a story of private battles, public duty, and a quiet resilience that redefined the heart of a modern monarchy. The morning mist hung low over the gardens of Buckingham Palace, a soft, gray blanket that muffled the usual sounds of the city. Inside, the atmosphere was anything but soft. It was a morning of sharp, precise movements, the clicking of military heels on polished floors, the rustle of silk as orders were adjusted for the final time, the low murmur of aides with checklists clutched tightly to their chests. Today was the annual ceremony of the Colonel's Review, the final dress rehearsal for the famous Trooping the Color, a spectacle of military precision and royal pomp that would paint the mall in scarlet and gold. For William, the Prince of Wales, the day carried a familiar weight. As Colonel of the Welsh Guards, his role was central, a part of his birthright he had grown into with a solemn sense of duty. He stood patiently as his aide-de-camp made a minute adjustment to his scarlet tunic, his mind already marching through the sequence of the day's events. His expression was the one the public knew well, calm, focused, pleasantly impassive. It was the face of a man who had learned, from a very young age, to build a wall between his inner world and the watching eyes of millions. Across the palace, in a sun-filled room that smelled of flowers and beeswax, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was putting the final touches on her appearance. She had chosen a striking ivory coat dress, a note of elegant simplicity amidst the military splendor. Her stylist gently placed a matching, wide-brimmed hat upon her head. Catherine met her own gaze in the mirror. To the outside world, she looked the picture of poised royalty, a smile already practiced and ready. But the woman in the mirror knew the truth of the morning. It had begun hours earlier, a creeping, familiar fatigue that felt heavier than lead, a subtle nausea that had made the simple act of getting dressed a quiet triumph. She had been living with an unseen illness, a private challenge whose name was now known to the public, but whose daily reality remained hers alone to bear. The treatments were grueling, their side effects a shadow that followed her every step. She had debated intensely and privately whether to attend today. The public expectation was a force in itself. Her absence would spark a whirlwind of speculation. Her presence, a statement of strength. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling the slight tremor in her hands. Duty, she thought, was not just about the grand gestures, but about showing up on the hard days, about allowing people to see not just a princess, but a person persevering. The carriage procession was a blur of noise and color. The roar of the crowd, lining the mall, was a physical wave of sound. William, riding on horseback at the head of the troops, was a figure of timeless tradition. He sat straight, his posture unyielding, acknowledging the cheers with a slight nod, his face a mask of regal composure. Catherine, traveling in a carriage with their children, waved with a gloved hand, her smile bright and consistent. She focused on the joyful faces of the little ones, using their natural excitement as an anchor. The difference between them in that moment was stark, yet connected by an invisible thread. He was immersed in the external performance of his role, a commander leading his men. She was engaged in an internal performance of her own, marshaling every ounce of her energy to appear well, to be present, to fulfill her role as a supportive wife and future queen. They were, as they so often were, playing their parts on different stages of the same grand theater. The ceremony itself unfolded with clockwork precision. The bands played, the soldiers marched in flawless lines, and the air was thick with the smell of horses and leather. William took the salute, his movements crisp and authoritative. From her position in the royal box, Catherine watched him. She saw not just the prince, but the man she had met at university, the young father who worried about their family, the partner who had sat with her through long, difficult conversations about her health. She saw the tension in the set of his shoulders, a tension only she would recognize, knowing the immense pressure he constantly carried. Her own discomfort was a dull, persistent ache, but her gaze remained fixed on him, a steady point in the swirling ceremony. She noticed the exact moment his eyes, during a brief lull in the formalities, scanned the stands. They were not the eyes of searching prince, but of a husband. They moved past the dignitaries, the military brass, the famous faces, and found hers. It was not a scheduled part of the day's proceedings. And then it happened. Their eyes locked. It was a connection that lasted no more than 3 seconds, but in that sliver of time, the grand performance fell away. In William's blue eyes, the formal, distant gaze dissolved, replaced by a flash of profound concern, a wordless question. "How are you managing? Are you all right?" In Catherine's, the brilliant public smile softened at the edges, and her gaze offered a quiet, resilient reassurance. "I am here. I am managing. Don't worry for me." It was a torrent of private understanding transmitted in absolute silence. A check-in, an acknowledgement of her struggle, a testament to his care, all conveyed in a look that bypassed their titles entirely. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the moment passed. William's eyes returned to the parade ground, his face once again the mask of a senior royal. Catherine resumed her gentle waving to the crowd. But something fundamental had shifted in the space between them. That glance was a secret shared in plain sight, a reminder that at the core of this ancient institution were two human beings, fighting their own battles, holding each other up. The ceremony drew to a close. The royal family began to assemble on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, a tradition as cherished as the parade itself. King Charles III stood, a figure of weathered dignity in his field marshal's uniform. He had observed the entire event with the keen, experienced eye of a monarch who had spent a lifetime in the public gaze. He had seen his son's impeccable duty. He had also, from his own vantage point, witnessed that fleeting, powerful exchange between William and Catherine. He had seen the mask slip, and he had seen the raw humanity beneath it. He understood, perhaps better than anyone alive, the immense cost of keeping those masks in place, the loneliness of duty, and the sacred importance of having one person with whom you could set it all down. As William and Catherine joined him on the balcony, the crowd's roar swelling to a crescendo below, Charles looked at his son and daughter-in-law. He gave a small, formal nod to William, an acknowledgement of a job well done. Then his eyes turned to Catherine. What he did next was not in any protocol book. He didn't just glance at her. He inclined his head towards her, a deliberate, slow, and unmistakable bow. It was not a bow from a monarch to a future queen consort. It was a bow from one soldier in the arena of public life to another. It was a father-in-law's silent tribute to a woman's courage, a king's respect for a princess's quiet fortitude. It was an act that said, without uttering a single word, "I see your struggle. I honor your strength." Catherine, caught slightly off guard, offered a small, gracious nod in return, her eyes glistening with a sheen of unshed tears. William, standing beside her, felt a surge of emotion so strong it tightened his throat. In that silent triad on the balcony, with the world cheering below, the truest ceremony of the day had just taken place. The roar of the crowd from the balcony was a distant echo now, replaced by the quiet hum of the palace's private quarters. The splendid uniforms and elegant coats were gone, swapped for the soft, comforting embrace of ordinary clothes. William stood by a window, looking out over the darkening garden, a glass of water in his hand. The formal mask was completely gone, leaving behind a face etched with fatigue and worry. The image of Catherine's eyes during that glance on the parade ground was seared into his mind. He had seen the effort behind her calm, the slight pallor her makeup couldn't entirely conceal. The pride he felt in her was immense, a fierce, protective wave, but it was tangled with a helpless frustration. He was the future king, a man used to fixing problems, to commanding solutions, yet he was powerless against this unseen enemy attacking his wife. He could organize the world's best doctors, but he couldn't take the nausea from her. He could shield her from public demands to an extent, but he couldn't shoulder the physical burden of her treatment. This helplessness was a new and bitter flavor in a life spent preparing for command. He heard a soft sound and turned. Catherine was curled on a large sofa, a cashmere blanket draped over her legs. She looked smaller somehow, the day's monumental effort having finally drained her reserves. She was staring into the low fire, her expression unguarded and weary. William walked over and sat beside her, not speaking, simply taking her hand in his. His touch was gentle, his thumbs slowly stroking her knuckles. "Today," he began, his voice rough. Today was, where words failed him. How could he articulate the storm of pride, fear, and love that had churned within him as he sat on his horse, knowing she was fighting her own battle just to be there? Catherine turned her head towards him, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. It was a tired smile, but it reached her eyes. "I saw you," she said softly, "up there leading them. You looked every inch the part." She was turning the focus back to him, a habitual gesture of hers to deflect attention from her own struggle. But William wouldn't have it, not tonight. "No," he said, his voice firm but tender. "Look at me, Kate." He used the private name, the one from their university days, a signal that this was just them, William and Kate, not the Prince and Princess of Wales. "That look you gave me, it was the only thing that felt real out there today. Everything else was noise. I was so bloody proud of you, and so—" He trailed off, swallowing hard. "So worried," she finished for him, her smile turning a little sad. She squeezed his hand. "I know. I could see in your eyes, too. And that's what got me through the last hour." She paused, gathering her strength. "It's strange, isn't it? A million people were watching, but it felt like for those few seconds, it was just us. Like we had our own private language in the middle of it all." William nodded, pulling her closer so her head rested against his shoulder. "It's always been our secret, hasn't it?" Our glances across a crowded room. He thought of their wedding day, the nervous, excited looks they'd exchanged at the altar, of christenings where a shared look over a baby's head spoke of their shared joy and exhaustion, of state dinners where a subtle eye roll at a particularly long speech was a lifeline of humor. Their marriage had been built, in part, on this silent vocabulary. But today's glance had been different. It wasn't about shared joy or private jokes. It was about shared survival. It was a lifeline thrown across a chasm of public scrutiny, a tangible connection when both were isolated by their respective duties and trials. "I wasn't sure I could do it this morning," Catherine confessed, her voice a whisper against his shirt. The thought of the carriage, the noise, the smiling, it felt like a mountain. "But then I thought of you, out there alone on your horse, with all that expectation on your shoulders. And I thought of what our presence together means to people, especially now." She was speaking of the many letters they received from others battling illness, who wrote that seeing the royal family carry on gave them a sliver of hope for their own normalcy. "So I put on the dress, and I did it. And seeing you was my anchor." William pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his heart so full it ached. "You are my anchor, Kate. You always have been." He thought back to the early, turbulent years of their relationship, to the times when the pressure had threatened to pull them apart. It was her steady, unwavering belief in them, in a life that could be both normal and extraordinary, that had grounded him. Now, the tables were turned in the cruelest way. Her steadiness was being tested by forces beyond her control, and his role was to be the anchor, to be the safe harbor. He was determined to be that, even if he couldn't fix the root cause of the storm. They sat in comfortable silence for a long while, the fire crackling companionably. The distant sounds of the city were a gentle reminder of the world outside their bubble. Here, in this quiet room, they weren't symbols of a nation's future. They were a husband and wife, tired and worried, drawing strength from simply being together. The powerful glance they had shared that afternoon was not an isolated event. It was the public manifestation of this private, nightly reality, a reality of quiet support, unspoken fears, and a love that had been tempered in the relentless glare of the public eye into something incredibly strong and deeply resilient. It was this private fortress they had built together that allowed them to step back out into the light and fulfill their public destiny, one careful, supportive glance at a time. The world, of course, had seen the glance. In the age of the smartphone and the ever-present telephoto lens, no moment, no matter how brief or private, truly escapes capture. By evening, the image was everywhere. Not a front-page splash of scandal, but a quieter, more pervasive presence across social media and digital news outlets. It was a grainy, zoomed-in clip a few seconds long, showing William on horseback, his head turning, his eyes finding Catherine's in the stands. The video paused, circled, and replayed. Commentators, body language experts, and the general public alike began to dissect those 3 seconds. A moment of profound connection, one headline read. The look that said everything, declared another. Twitter and Instagram flooded with comments. Did you see how his whole face changed? You can see the love and worry from here. She looks so strong, but you can tell it's taking everything she has. This is what real partnership looks like. The narrative was not one of royal pomp, but of human emotion. For a public accustomed to seeing the Waleses as polished, flawless figures, this crack in the perfect facade was not a weakness. It was a revelation. It made them relatable. It showed the immense human cost of the duty they performed so gracefully. The king's bow was analyzed with equal fervor, seen as a rare and powerful breaking of royal protocol to acknowledge personal courage. The public's reaction was a wave of empathy. Letters began to pour into Kensington Palace, not of complaint or mere admiration, but of shared stories. Mothers undergoing chemotherapy wrote to Catherine, saying her visible effort gave them the courage to attend their child's school play. Husbands wrote to William, thanking him for showing that strength isn't about hiding worry, but about supporting your partner through theirs. The glance and the bow that followed had transcended a royal event. It had become a symbol for anyone who had ever put on a brave face while fighting a private battle, for anyone who had ever sought a loved one's eyes across a room for strength. Inside the palace walls, the public's response was monitored by the communications team. The usual metrics were reported: media reach, sentiment analysis. But the true impact was felt in the quieter, more personal reports of the letter's contents. William and Catherine were shown a carefully selected, anonymized sample. Reading them was a humbling experience. Catherine was particularly moved by a letter from a young woman battling a chronic illness, who wrote, "You showed me that showing up doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be you trying, and that is enough." It validated her difficult decision to attend that day. The private struggle she had endured was not in vain. It had spoken directly to others in the same silent fight. William, reading a letter from a former soldier with PTSD who praised his unwavering focus on duty while clearly being anchored by his family, felt a deep sense of resonance. His life had often felt like a series of compartments: the royal duty, the charitable work, the private family man. The public's interpretation of the glance showed him that people didn't see compartments. They saw a whole man, a man whose love for his wife was inseparable from, and in fact strengthened his commitment to his role. The idea that showing vulnerability could be a source of strength, not a detriment to authority, was a modern lesson he was learning in real time. This external validation created a subtle but important shift in their own perspective. The glance had been instinctive, a private Morse code between two hearts. To see it reflected back as a source of public strength and connection lessened their sense of isolation. It reminded them that their story, in its humanity, was intertwined with the stories of millions they served. They were not alone on their balcony. They were surrounded, in spirit by a nation of people who understood struggle, valued resilience, and honored quiet courage. The powerful glance had started as a silent conversation between two people and had ended up echoing in the hearts of countless others, creating a profound and unexpected circle of understanding and respect. Weeks turned into months, and the vivid intensity of the trooping the color day slowly blended into the fabric of their ongoing lives. Catherine's treatment continued, its rhythm dictating the quiet background of their schedule. Some days were better than others. There were mornings where she could join William for a brisk walk with the dogs in the grounds of Amer Hall, laughter coming easily, color in her cheeks. There were other days where the world shrank to the confines of their private rooms, the curtains drawn against the bright sun, the only goal being to endure. William's role became one of profound adaptation. State tours and grand ceremonies were carefully balanced against blocks of quiet, private time. The palace diary, once a master of rigid protocol, learned to accommodate a new, unspoken priority, her well-being. He became an expert in the small things. He learned which foods were most likely to stay down on difficult days and would quietly have them prepared. He mastered the art of reading her energy levels from a single glance, when her brightness was genuine and when it was a brave facade. He would cancel his own engagements at the last minute, not with fanfare, but with a simple, firm instruction to his staff if he felt she needed him at home. This was not a dereliction of duty, but a redefinition of it. His first duty, he believed fiercely, was to his family. The monarchy would survive a postponed meeting. His children needed a present father, and his wife needed a supportive husband. He learned to delegate more, to trust his team, understanding that his strength was not in micromanaging every royal duty, but in leading a balanced life that could be sustained for decades to come. Their communication evolved. The powerful glances still happened, across a garden party, at a charity film premiere, but they were now underpinned by a deeper, more explicit dialogue. They talked more openly about fears, about the future, about the kind of parents they wanted to be through this challenge. The unspoken understanding was now fortified with spoken words. Catherine shared the physical details of her struggle when she had the energy not to burden him, but to include him. William shared his frustrations with the constraints of his position, his anger at the unfairness of her illness, his fears of not being enough. Their marriage, always strong, was being tempered in a fire of adversity, emerging not brittle, but forged into something even more flexible and resilient. One afternoon, they found themselves in the gardens of Sandringham on a rare, completely private weekend. Catherine was having a good day. They walked slowly, arm in arm, through the dappled light beneath ancient oaks. The conversation turned, as it often did, to the future, not the distant future of the crown, but the near future of their family, their work. That day, on the parade ground, William said thoughtfully, "And what came after the letters, it made me think about what we're actually doing this for." He paused, searching for the right words. "It's not about the uniforms and the carriages, is it? It's about that connection. It's about people seeing something real, however small." Catherine nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder as they walked. "I think that's always been our strength, even before all this. We've just tried to be us, a bit more openly now, perhaps." She looked up at the canopy of leaves. All those letters were from people who didn't see a princess ignoring her illness. They saw someone trying to be a mother, a wife, a working woman, while being poorly. They saw the trying. And they saw, William added gently, squeezing her arm, a husband who adores his wife, not a prince performing a role. He stopped walking and turned to face her. "That's the monarchy I want to lead. One where duty doesn't mean hiding your humanity, but where your humanity informs your duty. Where we can be of service not just by being symbols, but by being real." It was a simple, yet revolutionary statement. They were not just surviving a personal crisis. They were unconsciously redefining a centuries-old institution in its wake. The firm had always valued stoicism, the never complain, never explain ethos. But William and Catherine were quietly writing a new chapter, one where explaining a little, where showing the struggle, could foster a deeper, more meaningful connection with the people they served. The powerful glance and the monarch's bow were not just isolated moments of drama. They were signposts pointing towards a more emotionally intelligent, relatable, and thus enduring form of monarchy. Their story was becoming the story of the crown's evolution, written not in laws or decrees, but in shared glances, quiet support, and an unbreakable partnership that was proving to be the greatest strength of all. The final stage of Catherine's treatment arrived, a milestone that was both daunting and hopeful. It required a period of focused recovery, a stepping back from public life that was communicated with a new, refreshing candor. The statement released was not the usual vague palace business, but a heartfelt message from Catherine herself, acknowledging the journey, thanking the public for their support, and looking forward to returning when she was stronger. The response was another wave of public warmth, a collective holding a breath for her well-being. During this time, William's solo engagements took on a new tone. He spoke more freely, not about private details, but about the universal themes their experience had highlighted: the importance of family, the courage of those facing illness, the strength found in partnership. At a mental health charity event, he surprised the audience by diverging from his prepared notes. "We talk a lot about resilience," he said, his voice earnest, "and we often picture it as a solitary thing, a stiff upper lip. But I've learned recently that true resilience is often a shared project. It's found in the hand you hold, in the quiet understanding across a room, in the small, everyday acts of support that build a fortress around the people you love." The room was utterly silent, everyone understanding the unspoken reference. He was not just a prince giving a speech. He was a man sharing a hard-won truth. Meanwhile, in the quiet of their home, Catherine focused on healing. Her world was small and precious: books, quiet time with the children doing puzzles or listening to them read, slow walks in the garden. William made sure his returns from engagements were not just physical, but emotional. He would bring home stories, the funny thing a veteran had said, the beautiful project a community group had built. He kept her connected to the world she loved, not as a duty, but as a promise of the future. The children, guided by both parents with careful honesty, adapted beautifully. Their resilience mirrored their mothers, quiet, practical, and rooted in the security of their family unit. The day Catherine was declared to be in the clear and on a strong path to full recovery was a private celebration, a flood of relief so profound it left them both breathless and tearful. It was a victory won in the quietest of ways, in hospital rooms and private sitting rooms, far from the public eye. But the desire to mark a new beginning, to step forward together, was strong. They chose a small, symbolic engagement for her return, the opening of a new hospice wing, a cause close to both their hearts, one that spoke of care, dignity, and the fragility of life. The air was different as they stepped from their car. There were no military bands, no trooping horses, just a crowd of staff, patients, and well-wishers gathered in a sun-dappled courtyard. Catherine looked radiant, not in a glamorous, untouchable way, but in a way that spoke of health returning, a light in her eyes that was unmistakably her own, an ease in her smile that didn't seem practiced. William walked beside her, his pride a visible, tangible thing. He didn't hover protectively. He walked as her partner, matching her pace, his joy evident in the relaxed set of his shoulders. As they toured the facility, they stopped to talk to a woman in a wheelchair, a patient receiving respite care. The woman, her hands frail, reached out and took Catherine's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "for showing us it's okay not to be okay, and for showing us that coming back is possible." Catherine knelt down, bringing herself to the woman's eye level, and spoke to her softly, their conversation a private bubble in the public space. William watched them, his expression one of such profound love and respect it was almost heartbreaking to see. It was then that the cameras, present but respectfully distant, captured the sequel to the powerful glance. As Catherine rose from her conversation, she turned to find William's gaze already upon her. This time, the look was not one of worried inquiry, but of pure, unadulterated admiration and joy. It was a look that said, "Look at you. You did it. You are magnificent." And in her eyes, as she looked back at him, there was gratitude, not for his position or his protection, but for his steadfastness, for being the quiet constant through the storm. It was a glance that spoke of a battle shared, a valley traversed, and a future faced together with hard-won hope. This glance was not about survival anymore. It was about flourishing. They left the hospice hand in hand, the spring sun warm on their faces. The journey ahead for the monarchy was long, filled with unknown challenges and the relentless pressure of history. But William and Catherine now carried with them a knowledge deeper than any protocol manual could provide. They knew that the true power of the crown in the modern age did not lie in its distance, but in its humanity. It lay in the courage to be vulnerable, the strength to be supportive, and the quiet revolutionary act of loving each other openly, honestly, and deeply in good times and in hard times. Their story, marked by a powerful glance and a monarch's bow, was no longer just their own. It had become a blueprint, a promise that the future of the monarchy would be built not just on tradition and duty, but on the unshakable foundation of real, relatable human resilience.